Hi guys, we're at week one of this month's debate about politics, and week one I think is perhaps the most challenging week because we discuss ideologies. Now ideologies are actually not very complicated, except it's something which you can't see, touch or feel, and therefore becomes a little bit more challenging to grasp. Well, because you can't touch or see them, you can't really grasp them. But an ideology is simply a collection of ideas, right? It's your position on many different things, on things that you like, right? Or things that you agree in or disagree in. And based on these different things, you group them together and you say, that is my ideology, right? So if I'm more into openness, right? So I like free trade, I like free movement of labor, I like, what else? Free food, maybe free university education, I don't know. But if you like many free things, then maybe that can be your ideology, right? Freedom, your ideology of open markets, right? Your ideology of openness. So those things can group together and they can become an ideology. So within politics, there are a few dominant ideologies which evolve and change. Now, no ideology is absolutely fixed, and in different countries, the same ideology can mean slightly different things, right? Communism in North Korea is different from communism in Cuba, different from communism in China, okay? So approach this debate, use ideologies as a kind of guide to explain or to help people or help you understand what people generally believe in. Right? But how different people or different countries apply that ideology can be different. Okay? So we'll, as we progress through this, I'm sure you're going to understand the ideologies a little bit more. Now, so let's go into the debate. Okay? So the first debate this week is about China. Well, not the first debate, but the debate for the first week. Well, there are three debates, but I want to talk about this debate about China. Whether or not China should prioritize democratization over economic development. So, what is this debate about? It's a debate about ideologies. It's a debate about ideological change, right? So, it's a debate primarily about the direction that China should be taking, okay? Now, to organize this a little bit, I think the debate is about, say, three things. One, about the ideology. So which ideology better suits China? We all know, and China says that they practice communism. How do we know this? Because they have some signs of the communist ideology. They also call themselves that, right? So there's the Chinese Communist Party that runs China, also known as the CCP. So if we're going to democratize, then it would maybe be a shift from that ideology. Not so much. You can have communism within a democratic framework, but you must have that democratic framework, meaning free and fair elections, meaning different parties, right? So you can't have a one-party state, but you can have a communist party operating within democracy. We see this in countries like India, for example, okay? So that's the first thing. The debate is about that ideology, about whether or not China should move towards more and more democracy, okay? The second thing this debate is about, well, the economy and about transitions, about countries that change and how that change happens, okay? So many countries want democracy when they don't really have it, right? When you're trying to overthrow a dictator or something like that, the people enjoy democracy. But when people are in power, they tend to not want democracy that much, right? Because they say it gets in the way of governance. If I have to have elections, if I have to listen to everyone, if I have to count votes, I have to be transparent, I can't, build roads and houses and schools. It's difficult. It makes my work very difficult because there's lots of regulation. Now, it depends how much of this you believe, but that's what a lot of leaders say. Well, that's what a lot of companies say. If there's a lot of regulation, companies want to go elsewhere. Unfortunately, people can't do that. People can't say, I want to go elsewhere if my country doesn't work. Well, you can, but not many people do that and it's very difficult. But back to this, okay? So countries say that, some countries say that, democracy gets in the way of governance, and I can govern more effectively if I don't have democracy. So that's what China says, or well, used to say, right? So they want to focus on economic development because if you can lessen the democratic oversight, if I don't need to have so many elections or so many different voices, I can focus on developing. And to China's credit, they've done that. They've grown the fastest out of any country in the last couple of decades, right? Some people say that's because they started at a very low position, but others say it's because the Chinese Communist Party made some very good choices for the people. And they've had record growth, they've lifted more people out of poverty than any organization, any one country, and those things have been amazing, okay? So, is it time then for them to change into a democracy? Or is what's going on there right now good enough, and why do we need to change, okay? So that's the second thing, well, contention, or, well, not really contention, but second issue in this debate, right? About that change and that transition. Should economic development come before democracy? Or which stage do you move from one to the other? Okay, so that's the second thing about this movement and this transition. And the third thing the debate is about China, obviously, right? So while you can talk about how other countries democratized and changed, right? It's primarily a debate about China. For example, Korea went through an amazing transformation, right, in the 70s and 80s, and there was a period of non-democracy when Korea was under an autocracy, right, and under dictatorship rather, and but that was also a time of amazing development, and many people say that the Park Chung-hee era under dictatorship was necessary to lift Korea into that stage of development. And some people can use that comparison with China. And some of those things will apply. But we need to keep in mind that China could be different. That China is much bigger than Korea. That China is less homogeneous, right, than Korea. It's a collection of many small countries, some may argue, even though it's very, very old and has a very, very old civilization. So that's the third thing this debate is primarily about, right? It's a discussion about China, right? So you need to have a little bit of all of those three things. One, a discussion about ideologies, about democracy and communism, which one is more valuable. Secondly, a discussion about transition and change. Do you need to have the economy before democracy? How do you move from democracy to, from a non-democratic environment to a democratic environment? And thirdly, it's a debate about China, right? A discussion about China. So those are the main things the debate is about. But if you're going to narrow it down to, say, to two contentions, the first contention would be about whether or not democracy is necessary. What is the value of democracy, right? Is it something you need, you don't need? To what extent do you need it? How is it useful and useful for China? And the second contention is this chicken and egg about democracy and economic development. Which one should come first? Do you need economic development first and then have democracy, or can they go both, hand in hand? Can the chicken and the egg come together? That's going to be the major sort of contentions in the debate. Okay, so let's look at the different sides in the debate. So on the government side of the debate, you have many arguments, but I think the three primary arguments, right? So the first one is that China is ready. That China is ready right now at this point in time to move to a democracy. Second thing is that democracy goes hand in hand with economic development. And thirdly is that delaying this will do more harm. Okay, so those are the three major arguments. I'll describe them a little bit. So when you discuss China's readiness, you are kind of saying you need some prerequisites for democracy, but China's met those prerequisites. That they've made huge gains across the past few years, that they've actually started to democratize slowly. They've had municipal level elections, the CCP has gotten more and more transparent, and the level of strict communism has reduced, right? Now, so what I mean by strict communism is, under strict communist framework, you don't have things like private ownership of property. right? Everything belongs to the state. And in some parts of China, that's true. People don't get to own their own land. All their produce is sold to the government, and then the government resells it to other people. But China's not that strict communist nation, right? They are kind of communist capitalist. They have a capitalist economy, but a communist political system, if that's possible. But a capitalist economy requires some kind of democratization. So people need to have private ownership of property, for example. It's hard for me to do business if I can't own things, right? I need to be old and sell things. There are many rich people in China now, and the rich people want to have more say about the things which they own. So if I've spent so much money buying this house, I want to decide the rules and things that apply to that house, whether I can sell it, whether I can't sell it, who I can sell it to, and all of those different things. So China's gone through some kind of change, and you'll describe this change on government. You want to show that they are ready now for democracy, that they have evolved for that democracy. Describe all of these things in some kind of trend, and then say that now's a good time to move. Okay. You're doing this because you want to make it seem like a very natural transition, right? So that's the first thing, the first argument, that China is ready now for democracy. They've done enough prioritization on economic development. It's time to shift that to focus on democracy. The second argument is that democracy and economic development can go hand in hand. Okay, so this is not really a readiness argument, and some people may want to run this argument first because it doesn't depend on showing that China is ready, and you're not conceding that you need economic development before democratization, right? You're actually saying that democracy is important and necessary for proper economic development, or proper development rather. And why? Well, because if you don't have everybody involved in the development, then the development is going to become skewed. It's going to prioritize some people over other people because everyone wants to develop and everyone's looking at themselves, right? So, and we see that happening in China now. There's a widening gap between the rich and the poor, and the rich has a correlation with political power. People in the CCP have a lot more power over and wealth over people who are not. You can also argue that the democratic framework creates much more efficient development because you get more people involved. People take direct ownership over that development, right? If I decide that this is what I want, then I work harder for it. Then I'm driven to achieve those things, right? So, well, at least that's the theory. And you can look at other countries that are democratic and show how they're more creative, they're more dynamic, and the people are more driven towards achieving great and wonderful things. Okay, so that's the second thing. You can show that the economy and democracy go hand in hand, and you can't have one before the other. The third argument is that delaying this will cause more harm. That there are already gaps starting to form in society, in Chinese society, and you need some kind of democratization to overcome this. Okay, and so this is kind of like the first idea that now is the time, but rather you're doing it like a negative. You're saying that all these harms from a lack of democratization that could undo a lot of the powerful, wonderful things that China has, done over the past few years. Okay, so you can talk about a few things under this argument. Firstly, is the gaps that have started to form in society between the rich and the poor, between the empowered and unempowered, right? And how people are getting very upset about these things. They're getting angry and starting to lose faith in the Chinese Communist Party. And it's better for the CCP to have a gradual transition into democracy rather than to have some kind of big takeover. And then the country is going to be very unstable and it's going to break apart, right? And the second thing is that breaking apart. Like as economic development happens, and because it's not uneven, and also because China has many different minorities, right? Like the Tibetans, like the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, like many of these different sections, and also internal migration between people and the differences between the countryside, the people in the cities, and so on and so forth. it's really important to have some kind of democracy and involvement and autonomy now. Otherwise, people are going to start to move further and further apart, and then you're going to have problems. Okay, so that's the third argument that you will run, that there's going to be many, many harms that are starting to form, but it's going to get much worse if China doesn't shift its focus to democracy now. All right, so those are the arguments on GOV. What about OP? What do you talk about on opposition? So what's tricky on opposition is your position on democracy, right? You can say that you don't think democracy is required, that China is doing a great job right now, the democracy is broken anyway, look at America, and they keep fighting over politics and wasting money. You don't need that kind of democracy. Or you can do this, democracy is good, but maybe not now, maybe not this way, right? Now they both are a little bit tricky positions to take. I think it's hard to say we want communism forever and ever and ever, because you can see the fault lines forming in Chinese society, and it's going to be a hard thing to defend, right? But it's also hard to say that, this whole now's not the time, because then you need to say when is the time, right? So, but I still think that that's the more feasible approach to take, because it's really hard for you to say that I never want democracy, that democracy is completely unnecessary. So you can say that China's democratizing, and with this you can agree with the government side that yes, they're making all these changes. But talk about how they don't need to shift their focus, that they should still focus on economic development, and through that economic development, the change is already happening naturally, right? So they don't need to have these elections, they don't need to have multi-party systems, they just keep focusing on economic development and allow people to democratize economically by making more and more economic choices, okay? So more ownership over land, more greater ability to move around the country, to buy things, to own things, to exert their choices and stuff that way, okay? And say that as long as China's functioning in that sense, and as long as China's committed to fighting corruption and introducing transparency, right, you can still achieve those positive gains, right? So I think that's a great position to take from OP, and it's going to be your kind of first big argument, right? Let me lay out all my arguments. Let's be organized here. Right, so I think the two main things that to run on OP, the first one was what I was saying, that it's not really necessary that China can achieve all these positive things. In fact, it's better if they focus on economic development. So basically supporting the status quo, and secondly talk about the harms that this shift in priority could create. Okay, so on the first idea, as I was saying a little bit earlier, you can achieve, as long as you can achieve the good things for the people, you don't need that structure of democracy. So I don't need to have these national elections, I don't need to have multi-party systems, I don't need to shift my focus and ideology. I just need to make sure I'm delivering good things to the people, and China's doing that. And their check and balances inherent within the system. People are beginning to clamp down on corruption. They notice people who are rich and poor are too rich, right? And then they're challenging these things, and that's happening in China. Okay, so you don't need to have democracy in order to have this kind of equitable development. It's happening already in China. In fact, it's better, right? And you can use the GOV's arguments a little bit, because the GOV will show that China's changed and developed. You can say like, yes, exactly. They've done all these wonderful, amazing things, and they need to do more, because there's still so many more poor people in China, and democracy could get in the way. And this is your second argument, how democracy can lead to some harms. And for this one, you need to talk about the Chinese context. Talk about how China's still very divided and fractured, right? Politically divided and economically divided and ethnically still divided, and they need to unify over the economy, that everybody wants a better life, right? And the reason why people get really upset is because they think that the economic development is happening unfairly, that some people are developing more than other people. And if you transition into a democracy now, then those resentments are going to become stronger with the different ethnic groups. Okay, so you're going to split the country along these ethnic lines, along these rich and poor lines, right? You're going to feel like, oh, I'm going to vote against those people because those people only help this group of people. So I've got to stick to my group of people. And on OP, we'll argue that that's what's going to happen, and that's bad, right? So China needs to overcome this, and they're overcoming this by their focus on economic development. If they can focus on the economy, they have the power to like shift wealth, right? They go after corruption, take down the rich people. Granted, this is a problem, but the new president is doing a great job fighting these things, and they can push more economic development into these regions. And when the economy gets a little bit more flat and people get a little bit more integrated, we think then the shift becomes more and more natural towards a democracy. So that's going to be my line on OP. It's going to be that the status quo is good enough, and I'll show you how it's working, and I don't really need this democracy. But secondly, that it could cause some harm if you move too quickly because of the Chinese context. And here I have to show that I understand China better than you. Okay, and that's inevitable. You need to discuss, you need to know something about China. And don't worry if you don't, doing this debate will teach you something about China. And you should, right? China's a huge, powerful country in our region, and the more you know about China, the better. Well, the more you know about the more things, the better. Start with what you don't know, and then you can know more, right? So, in summary, guys, this is a debate about political ideologies, right? So, which ideology suits which context better? It should help you identify the notion of ideology and philosophy and how it's used in a debate. But most important is about the context, about how it's applied to different places. Okay, so the same ideology in a different place may not nearly work as well. So at the end of the day, you still need to talk about the real effects on people. It's not just an empty, theoretically which one is better. It's always more important about how it applies to that context. Okay, so enjoy debating about political ideologies, and we'll see you again. I'll see you again when we talk about week 2. Cheers.